The day I realized he forgot my sacrifices was not loud. There was no argument, no slammed doors, no harsh words. It happened at our own dining table, under warm yellow lights, with soft music playing in the background. We were celebrating his success. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of building a life together. The house was full that night. Our children were there, close friends too. The table was decorated with white flowers and candles. Laughter filled the room. Glasses clinked gently. I sat beside my husband, Daniel. He looked proud, confident, taller somehow. When it was time for speeches, our daughter stood up first. "Dad, you showed us what hard work really means," she said. "You built everything we have." Everyone clapped. I smiled. Then Daniel stood up. He cleared his throat and held his glass in the air. "I came here with nothing. No money, no help, just a dream." The room became quiet. I worked day and night. I sacrificed everything to build this life. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around my napkin. He continued, "There were times I thought I would fail, but I pushed through. I never gave up. And today I can proudly say I built all this with my own 2 hands." Applause filled the room. People looked at him with admiration. And in that moment, I looked at my own hands. They were resting quietly on the table, older now, softer, a little wrinkled. These hands had packed his lunches before sunrise. They had washed clothes when we could not afford a machine. They had counted coins in the kitchen when bills were due. They sold my gold necklace when his business almost failed. But that night, those hands felt invisible. I smiled for the photos. I clapped with everyone else. No one noticed the silence growing inside me. Later, after the guests left and the house grew quiet again, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. The warm water ran over my hands, the same hands that helped build everything he spoke about. Daniel walked in behind me. "You were quiet tonight," he said gently. "I was listening," I replied. "To what?" he asked. I paused. "To our story." He laughed softly, not understanding. "It was a good night," he said. "Everyone was happy." "Yes," I answered. "Everyone was." But something inside me had shifted. That night I lay awake beside him while he slept peacefully, and for the first time in many years, I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask before. When did our story become only his? When Daniel and I first got married, we did not have much. We rented a small house at the edge of town. The walls were thin, the paint was peeling near the windows. When heavy trucks passed by, the whole place would shake slightly. But it was ours. The kitchen was my favorite room. It was small, but every morning sunlight came through the window above the sink. That light made everything feel hopeful. Daniel had big dreams, even then. He did not want to work for someone else forever. He wanted his own business, his own name on the door. "I don't want to live small," he used to say, and I loved that about him. At that time, I worked at a grocery store nearby. I stood at the register for long hours, smiling at strangers, packing their bags carefully. The pay was not much, but it was steady. Every Friday when I came home, I would take a small portion of my salary and place it into a glass jar inside our kitchen cabinet. We called it the future jar. Daniel would open the cabinet sometimes, shake it gently, and smile at the sound of coins and folded bills inside. "One day," he would say softly, "this will be the start of something big." When our first child was born, everything changed. Diapers were expensive. Milk was expensive. Life became expensive. I stopped working full-time because childcare cost more than I earned, so instead I worked evenings when Daniel came home. I would kiss the baby's forehead and rush out the door. Some nights I felt so tired my feet burned, but I never complained. Daniel's business idea was growing slowly. He rented a tiny office space with borrowed money. He spent long hours there. Sometimes he came home discouraged. "I don't know if this will work," he whispered once, sitting at the kitchen table late at night. The house was quiet. Our baby was asleep. I made him tea and sat across from him. "It will," I said. "I believe in you." And I did. There was one year that almost broke us. The business was failing, payments were late, phone calls from lenders became more frequent. One afternoon, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. "If I can't fix this," he said quietly, "we could lose everything." I walked to my dresser and opened the small jewelry box my mother had given me on my wedding day. Inside was a simple gold necklace. It was not very big, but it meant a lot to me. It was the only piece of my mother I had carried into this marriage. I held it for a long moment. Then I closed the box and handed it to Daniel. "We can sell this," I said. He was shocked. "No, that's yours." "It's ours," I corrected gently. He did not argue after that. We sold it the next day. I never told him that I cried quietly that night in the bathroom, not because of the money, but because it felt like letting go of a piece of my past. Still, I told myself something important. We are building a future. Years passed slowly. The jar in the cabinet filled and emptied and filled again. I learned how to stretch every dollar. I cut coupons, I repaired clothes instead of replacing them, I watered down soup to make it last 2 days instead of 1. Daniel worked hard, I will never deny that. But while he built his dream outside the home, I built stability inside it. I handled school forms, doctor appointments, late-night fevers, parent meetings. When our son cried because his father missed another recital, I held him close and said, "Daddy is working for us." And I believed that too. There were many evenings when I ate dinner alone with the children. Daniel often came home after they were asleep. I would leave his plate covered on the stove. Sometimes he warmed it and ate quietly. Sometimes he fell asleep without touching it. We did not talk about how tired we were. We were young. We thought sacrifice was simple. But sacrifice is not simple. It is made of small daily choices, small silences, small pieces of yourself given away without asking for anything back. Back then, I never kept count, because I thought he saw, I thought he remembered, and maybe he did, at first. But as the business grew and the house became bigger and the car became newer, something slowly shifted. The jar in the cabinet disappeared, not because we needed it anymore, but because we forgot how much it once meant. Success did not arrive loudly. It came slowly, quietly, like morning light that you do not notice until the room is bright. Daniel's business began to grow. 1 client became 3, 3 became 10, 10 became more than I could count. The small office turned into a larger space downtown. He hired employees, he wore suits more often. His phone rang constantly. I was proud of him. When we moved into our new house, I stood in the empty living room and ran my fingers along the smooth painted walls. "We did it," I whispered. Daniel smiled. "Yes," he said, "I finally did it." I noticed the word, but I ignored it. I told myself it was just excitement. At gatherings, people gathered around him. "You're such an inspiration. You built everything from nothing." Daniel would nod politely. He would tell the story of the risks he took, the nights he stayed at the office, the pressure he carried. I would stand beside him, holding a plate of food, listening to the story I had lived too. Sometimes I waited for him to say, "My wife supported me from the beginning." Sometimes he did, but more often he forgot. At first, it was small. "My company is expanding. I made a difficult decision. I invested carefully." The word "we" slowly disappeared. One evening, after guests left our house, I said gently, "You've been saying 'I' a lot lately." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "When you talk about the business, about our journey." He sighed lightly. "Well, I was the one taking the risks." I felt something small tighten in my chest. "And I was the one holding everything together here," I replied softly. He did not answer right away. "I know," he said, finally, "but it's different." Different. I nodded, but I did not fully understand what he meant. Was it different? Was staying up with sick children not a risk? Was signing loan papers not pressure? Was selling my necklace not sacrifice? But I did not argue. I told myself he was stressed. Success brings its own weight. Still, small moments began to stay with me. One afternoon, I found an old notebook while cleaning the bedroom closet. It was filled with budgets I had written years ago, lists of expenses, plans for saving money, notes about cutting costs so the business could survive. I sat on the floor reading it. Daniel walked in. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Looking at old plans," I said. He smiled slightly. "You used to worry so much." Worry. That word felt strange. "I wasn't worrying," I said quietly. "I was planning." He kissed the top of my head and walked away. But he did not really see what I was holding. As time passed, Daniel became more confident, more certain of himself. He was invited to speak at events. He received awards. His photo appeared in a local magazine. One night, our son said at dinner, "Dad, I want to be like you one day, build something big." Daniel smiled proudly. "That's good," he said. "Hard work always pays off." I waited for him to add something. He did not. I looked down at my plate. It was not jealousy I felt. It was something quieter. It was the feeling of being slowly erased from a story you helped write. There were evenings when Daniel came home and talked for an hour about meetings and deals. When I spoke about the garden or about feeling lonely now that the children were older, he nodded but looked at his phone. He was not unkind, he was just elsewhere. Distance does not always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like distraction. Sometimes it looks like pride. And sometimes it looks like forgetting. I began to wonder something I had never wondered before. If I disappeared from the story completely, would anyone notice? I did not ask this question out loud, but it sat quietly inside me, growing. Our 30th anniversary arrived on a warm evening in early autumn. The air felt soft, the kind of air that carries memories. Our children insisted on planning a small celebration at the house. "Nothing too big," our daughter said, "just family and a few close friends." I helped arrange the flowers myself, simple white lilies in clear glass vases. Daniel ordered the food from a restaurant he liked. The dining table looked beautiful that night. Candles flickered gently. Soft piano music played in the background. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. I wore a blue dress Daniel once said brought out the color of my eyes. I had kept it for years. "You look nice," he said when he saw me. "Thank you," I replied. Guests began to arrive. Laughter filled the house again. The children hugged us both. There were photographs taken in the living room, in the hallway, near the staircase. I smiled in every picture. After dinner, our son tapped his glass with a spoon. "It's speech time," he announced. Everyone laughed. Our daughter stood first. She spoke about love, about growing up in a home that felt safe and strong. "Dad," she said, turning to Daniel, "you taught us what dedication looks like. You built everything we have." Applause filled the room. I clapped too. Then our son spoke about how proud he was of his father's journey, about how inspiring it was to see someone start with nothing and succeed. Again, applause. I felt proud, truly proud. Daniel stood up slowly. He held his glass, but his voice trembled slightly. "I never thought we would come this far," he began. The room became quiet. "When I started my business, I had nothing, no money, no safety net, just a dream. He paused. There were nights I thought it would all collapse. I carried so much pressure. I sacrificed sleep. I sacrificed time. I sacrificed comfort. I listened carefully. I worked day and night. I pushed through every obstacle. And today I can say I built this life with my own 2 hands. The room burst into applause. People stood up. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. I remained seated for a second longer than everyone else. Built this life with my own 2 hands. The sentence echoed inside me. I slowly looked down at my hands resting in my lap. They were calm, still, older than they once were. Those hands had held newborn babies alone at night. They had signed loan documents beside him. They had packed lunches and folded laundry in the early years. They had let go of a gold necklace without hesitation. But in that moment, those hands did not exist in his story. I stood up and clapped with everyone else. It happens in small conversations, like this one. That morning, I understood something else. I had been silent for too long. I had made myself small so that he could feel big. But love does not require disappearance. It requires presence. From that day forward, I promised myself something. I would still support him, but I would no longer erase myself. And Daniel, he began to notice more. Small changes at first, but small changes can grow. Change did not happen overnight. There were no grand speeches the next day, no dramatic promises, just small shifts. And sometimes small shifts are the most powerful. A week after our conversation, Daniel was invited to speak at a local business event. It was not a large crowd, but it mattered to him. I almost told him I would stay home. That had become my quiet habit over the years. But this time, he said something different. "I'd like you to come," he said. "Please." So I went. I sat in the second row, hands folded neatly in my lap, just as I always had. He stood on stage, confident as ever. He began telling his story, the familiar beginning, the early struggles, the fear of failure. I listened carefully. Then he paused. "There is something I used to forget to mention," he said. My heart skipped. I was not alone. My wife worked night shifts while raising our children. She saved every dollar. She sold her jewelry when my business nearly collapsed. If I built anything, it was because she was holding the foundation steady. The room became very quiet. Then applause. But this applause felt different. It was not loud inside my chest. It was warm. Daniel looked at me while he spoke those words, and for the first time in years, I did not feel invisible. After the event, people approached me. "I didn't know you did all that," one woman said gently. I smiled. "It was our life," I answered simply. At home, small things continued to change. When our children visited, Daniel began telling them stories from the early days. "Your mother used to stretch one chicken into 3 meals," he laughed one evening. "And she never let me give up," he added. Our daughter looked at me differently after that. "Mom, I never knew it was that hard," she said quietly. I shrugged gently. "It was just life," I replied. But inside, something healed. I began to speak more too. Not loudly, not with bitterness, just honestly. If Daniel said, "I worked so hard back then," I would gently add, "We both did." And he would nod. "Yes," he would say, "we did." There were still moments when old habits returned. Sometimes he slipped into saying "I" instead of "we." But now I would gently touch his arm, and he would correct himself. It was not about winning. It was about balance. One evening, months later, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was soft orange and pale pink. The house was quiet again. The children grown, the busy years behind us. Daniel reached for my hand. "I don't know when I stopped seeing it clearly," he said. "Seeing what?" I asked. "How much you gave." I thought for a moment. Maybe when things became easier. It's easy to forget the storm when the sun is shining. He nodded slowly. I don't ever want you to feel invisible again. I looked at him. I don't ever want to make myself invisible again, I replied gently.
That was the difference. Before, I waited to be seen. Now, I allowed myself to exist fully. I started doing small things just for me. I joined a reading group in town. I planted flowers in the garden, not because they saved money, but because they made me happy. For years, my identity had been tied to holding everything together. Now, I was learning to stand as myself. Daniel noticed. "You seem lighter," he said one afternoon. "I am," I answered. Not because he changed completely, but because we both did. Recognition is powerful, but self-recognition is even more powerful. The pain of that anniversary night did not disappear overnight, but it no longer felt sharp. It became a lesson, a quiet turning point. We still sit at the same dining table, the same warm lights above us. Sometimes when guests praise Daniel, he smiles and says, "None of it would have been possible without her." And I smile back. Not because I need the applause, but because I know the truth now. I was always part of the story, and I will never let myself fade from it again. There is something no one tells you about sacrifice. At the beginning, it feels beautiful. You give because you love. You stay quiet because you believe in someone. You put your dreams on hold because you think there will be time later. And sometimes there is. But sometimes, if you are not careful, you slowly disappear in the giving. For many years, I believed love meant standing in the background. I believed strength meant silence. I believed that if I supported him well enough, the world would see us as one. But the world often sees the one who speaks the loudest. It sees the one who stands on the stage. It does not always see the one who stayed awake at night balancing numbers at a kitchen table. It does not always see the hands that held everything together when no one was watching. The day I realized he forgot my sacrifices was painful, not because he was cruel, but because I understood something about myself. I had never asked to be seen. I had quietly stepped back again and again. And over time, he began to believe the story that showed only him. Love is not about keeping score, but it is about standing side by side, not behind, not ahead, side by side. Daniel did not mean to erase me. Success can be loud, it can be blinding, it can make someone forget the early shadows. But forgetting does not always come from bad intentions. Sometimes it comes from comfort, from habit, from never being gently reminded. Now, when we sit together in the evenings, the house calm and still, we talk more than we used to. We talk about the early days, about the jar in the kitchen cabinet, about the necklace, about the tiny house with the leaking roof. We even laugh about it. And sometimes Daniel looks at me and says, "We were brave." We. That word means more to me now than any applause ever could. Our children understand more too. They see our story as something shared. They see that strength can look quiet. And I see myself differently. I am not just the woman who supported. I am the woman who built a home, built stability, built courage, built a future. And I did it with my own 2 hands. If you are listening to my story, maybe you recognize a piece of yourself in it. Maybe you have given quietly. Maybe you have stood in the background of someone else's success. If so, I want to say something gently. Do not wait until you disappear. Speak softly, stand calmly, but stand. Love deeply, yes. Sacrifice when needed, yes. But never erase yourself from the life you are helping to build. Because every home is built by more than one pair of hands, and every pair deserves to be remembered. When I look at my hands now, I do not see invisibility. I see strength. I see history. I see a woman who loved fully and finally learned to love herself enough to be seen, and that has made all the difference.